What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Kansas City Commercial Real Estate Market Pulse, sponsored by Midwest Commercial Real Estate Advisors. I'm Logan Freeman, and we are joined today by Mr. Joe Perry. He is the president of the Lee Summit Economic Development Council. And today, Joe's going to be taking us behind the scenes on how one of the Kansas City's fastest growing cities is planning, is incentivizing, and talking about its future. But before we jump in, just want to make sure that if you're tuning in live on LinkedIn, please do know that you can join live here on LinkedIn and drop any comments or questions that you have kind of in the chat. My team is watching that, and we'd love to answer any questions that you've got. We are an interactive show, but we host this for really one simple reason. Clarity beats noise. And, I have found over my last 9 or 10 years of business that there's really no shortage of headlines, opinions, and predictions about commercial real estate. And I think what's missing truly is grounded market-specific insight from people actually doing the work, right? Listing the projects, leasing them, underwriting those deals, incentivizing them, planning those deals, getting the zoning in place, right? And closing deals here in Kansas City. So that's what we're all about. And I'm super stoked to have Mr. Joe Perry with us here today. We've shared the stage before where Joe was a moderator, which I'm sure he has done many, many different times. But Joe, for those that might not be as familiar with you, why don't you give everybody just a little bit of your background and kind of how you ended up in the position that you're in now here today?
Well, one thing, Logan, is if you just live long enough and work long enough, you get a lot of opportunities. And so I started out in the world of real estate by getting licensed while I was in college way back when. And then when I came to Kansas City after the big tax change law in 1986 that completely rewrote how we finance and hold and invest in real estate.
Yeah.
It was an awkward time, and I had the opportunity to go work for Avern Fogelman at the time, which was third largest multifamily developer in their nation, and was still building. And he happened to own half the Kansas City Royals, so what a great person to work for in
Absolutely.
1987. And that was my first intro at a time where you couldn't buy a job in real estate. I was actually lucky enough to have a job with someone who was building literally the only 2 multifamily projects in all of metropolitan Kansas City at the time.
Wow.
So, luck and from that point forward, I had a number of jobs working for big AE firms. I went back to school. First degree is real estate finance. Second was architecture and urban design. And combined those two and really just had the opportunity to work in a lot of good planning, and then went into land development with David Gale in early 2000s and got the opportunity to flex back into active development roles. And that was here in Lee Summit. We did a lot of fun and exciting work that I'm still proud of today. The next 15 years went to the Port Authority and got an opportunity to work with the team with Michael Collins and a few other people and built that program of that bond program, and then the riverfront development. John Stevens came along 7 years later and just blew it up even bigger.
Yeah.
And, just to be able then to be at a point in my career to have the choice to leave a team and a job I loved for 15 years to come back to Lee Summit at a point where this community is blowing up, where I get to take a little bit of credit for the great stuff that's already going on here, and hopefully have something to add. I've been here for about 10 months now.
Yeah, most definitely. And just a little bit of a fun insight. So, I know that you got your real estate finance and, money and banking degree from the University of Missouri.
Yes.
But then you went over to the University of Kansas and got a degree in architecture and urban design. So, the burning question in my mind is, are you a Mizzou Tiger fan, a Jayhawk fan, or both?
As much as it peeves people off in both camps, both. And I was born a Tiger. My parents went to school at the University of Missouri. All of my sisters and most of my brother-in-laws did too. I couldn't get my kids to go, but I will tell you that it's to go to KU and actually work at the athletic department after being taken to sit on the rocks when I was 6 years old, and going to the Hearns to watch the Tigers play basketball back in the day. I mean, I went every week sometimes as a kid to go to sports events, and then to go to KU later. It was hard for my family. It was not hard for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I grew up in Jefferson City, Missouri, so grew up a Tiger fan my whole life. Spent a lot of time at Faurot Field and the Hearn Center myself. So, and now I find myself, around people who are, KU fans left and right. So, it's always this interesting like dichotomy when I speak to out of state investors about Kansas City, because half of them don't know that Kansas City is, there is a Kansas City, Kansas, and there's a Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri is what really people are thinking about a lot. And then, so we've got State Line Road that divides the states, right? And now, obviously, we've been seeing, a lot going on with the quote unquote, border wars back in full activity. Some of my most popular posts this year have been around Lockton and the Chiefs and the Royals, right? So it's a very unique time to be in economic development. And, I have friends at the Kansas City, Missouri EDC. Jenna Scott was on the podcast not too long ago, and we're in groups together as well. So what an interesting time for Kansas City. What an interesting time for economic development, real estate development. But I'm just curious, we've got a few questions already coming in. One was around what the heck is the Port Authority? So I don't know if you want to spend any time talking about that.
Sure, no.
But number two was, what is your take, with the border wars going on in Kansas City? How does, because, from your perspective, you're going to have a much more robust experience with that, with the Port Authority and your experience. But, I just look at it from a commercial real estate standpoint and what are the ramifications, right? So there's kind of two questions there and they're not really related.
Well, let me start with real quick on the port. When I went there, I was the third employee, and there was no bond program. There was no third-party development finance tools that had ever been done. But my predecessors, to Michael and Soraya and Marissa and Jolene and others that were there, and Mark Coulter from the very beginning, when we started looking at what port authorities did all across the United States and the good work that our predecessors had done and studying that of what the Port Authority of Kansas City, Missouri could do under Chapter 68 in Missouri Revised Statutes, we basically just did an implementation and tactical plan of the good research that had already done, and we implemented what states around us were already doing with port authorities. So that's how, we attacked it. And port authorities are state agencies. They're created by local entities, in our case, Kansas City, Missouri. But you have the powers of a state jurisdiction, and it's a very powerful thing. So you have to be very careful when you have big powers that are different from others. And you have to be more careful rather than less careful. And that's what I'm really proud of, is the number of jobs, not just the riverfront development, which everybody seems to know that we got up and running.
Absolutely.
But the big deal for me was the jobs that we created. The other 80 cents out of $1 of revenues that came to the city and came to the state came in other than riverfront development. And so I'm really proud of that, because it became a national powerhouse. And I think the port is now the largest economic development agency by bond capacity in the state of Missouri. And it was done with just a very few people in a 15-year period of time. To put that into then what does that look like today on the border war? That second question.
Yeah.
I was so happy a few years ago when Missouri and Kansas kind of rolled up their sleeves and said, to what end does it help people to incent people to go back and forth across the state line? And there were the poster children that had done that multiple times as companies. And if you're beholden to a board of directors and you're a publicly traded company, you kind of should do that, right? On the other hand, if you're a state official or a local official looking at how does that push the needle for the region? It doesn't. So
Right.
I'm a little remiss that we're back in that position where people are saying, well, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and just start poaching each other again, because
Yeah.
it doesn't help Kansas Cityans be employed. It doesn't help Kansas Cityans get better bang for their taxes that they pay. So I'm disappointed in that, and I think there's plenty of blame to go around. So I won't talk about the specifics, but I will say that here we are sitting here, and I'm representing Lee Summit, and I guarantee you, and when the deals come in and it's good for Lee Summit, I'm going to be looking at helping companies expand in Lee Summit when it makes sense to them. And I'd rather those jobs get created by something that was homegrown here in Lee Summit or Eastern Jackson County than poaching it from another state. I love it when these things are organically built and we're helping companies grow, not stealing companies from somewhere else. I don't think that helps the national economy or the state economy necessarily, or the local economy. We have to really be careful with that and look ourselves in the mirror and say, did we push the needle for Kansas City? Did we push the needle for Lee Summit? Did we push the needle, for whatever jurisdiction level? And I mean from the federal down. And I think oftentimes when you find that project that wouldn't have grown as well somewhere else, that's when it makes sense. And where the ownership of the company is enriched by that investment, where the local jurisdictions, including all of them, I don't care if you're talking about the library board or the school board or the sewer district, everybody should win when these opportunities for public-private partnerships get put in front of us.
Absolutely. Well said, Joe. I appreciate your insight and perspective on that. I'm not a Kansas City native. I'm a Jefferson City boy, and I went to Helias, and so Lee Summit back in, let's say, 2005 all the way up to 2008 was really kind of when I was playing football in high school. Well, if you parlay where Lee Summit was 2005 to 2008, it was a up and coming submarket, right? Very different than what it is now. And Lee Summit West was this growing powerhouse of a school.
Yeah.
Right? And so we had this incredible football season. We had the home.
I remember this, by the way, and I was working in Lee Summit at the time. So yeah.
Yeah, so we had home field advantage, and Lee Summit West shows up in Jefferson City, Missouri with 3 charter buses full, and they get out, and they've got like 7 D1 players on this team. Us little Jefferson City boys, we're playing both ways. Lee Summit West has got offense, defense, and what's funny is, I actually ended up playing college football with like 4 or 5 guys on that team, but you guys mopped us on the floor. I mean, I think it was 47-0. During that game. And I was like, holy cow, who was that? And then the next year moved up to 5A. And I think maybe a couple years later moved up. And I was like, that place is on the move. So I even recognized it back in high school, right?
Yeah.
And just seeing that. So I just wanted to share that story with you because it still is ingrained in my mind, that football game.
I was officing about 2 miles south of the new high school when that game was played. And I remember well. That was a big deal for everybody. You
won state that year.
Yes.
It was an incredible year. So anyways, let's kind of pivot over to the Lee Summit Economic Development Council and talk to us about what the LSEDC actually is, what you guys focus on right now.
So this is a classic anomaly in some ways, but there are other models in Kansas City for markets that treat economic development the way Lee Summit does. The Lee Summit EDC is 40 years old right now. And I was a part of it when I worked with David Gale out here 25 years ago. And I've always thought it was a model of how to do economic development best. It's mostly privately funded historically and partially publicly funded. But because that funding comes from both, and it's not just city funded, it's not just funded by the Chamber of Commerce of the local area. We collaborate with a lot of other economic development agencies, including the Chamber, including Downtown Lee Summit Main Street and Experience Lee Summit. And some of those get public funding. But I think the magic here is that this is both. So we have a board of directors with people from school boards.
Yeah.
We have 2 superintendents of school on our board. So we have that check and balance with some of the taxing jurisdictions of, is it good for them as we
Sure.
discuss what's good for Lee Summit? The mayor, the city manager are on our board. So we have this great board, and then we have 9 privately funded directors that come in and represent business, represent employers, big employers like we usually have. Hospital executive, the new president of St. Luke's was on our board till he got that promotion last month. That's a good example of people. So we have these kinds of brain trust.
Yes.
Helps Lee Summit look at economic development through the lens of what's good holistically from a community. And I really think it works. It's expensive to do it this way outside of other things like a Chamber of Commerce, but it has been proven over the last 4 decades that Lee Summit's done well. To your point, Lee Summit, when I came to Kansas City, was 41,000 people, and it's 107,000 people today.
Wow.
And there is no other city other than Olathe, Kansas, in the metropolitan area that's growing, that is at least 50,000 people or up. You know, you look at those top 10 cities that are at 55,000 and up, and those 2 I just mentioned, Lee Summit in Missouri and Olathe in Kansas, are growing 2 times as fast as the next fastest growing, and 4 times faster than the one down from that.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got 2 cities that really have captured growth. And in both cities, I believe, are doing so in a very responsible way, that building quality communities in any way you put those metrics.
I tell you what, I mean, obviously, you know, not only outside capital, but local individuals. I know many people who have moved to Lee Summit for specific reasons. And, you know, when I talk to a lot of investors that try to get their bearings on Kansas City, Missouri, we always compare, you know, Lee Summit to the Johnson County side of Kansas, right? I mean, it really is. It's kind of this, you know, this breadwinner over in Eastern Jackson County. And obviously things like the Lee Summit Economic Development Council is one of the reasons why, right? And I also just have been astonished with the amount of development that has been going on. That takes, and I don't think people understand this, but
No, they don't.
I mean, how hard that is to actually coordinate. It's, I mean, at that rapid level of growth. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
I will. Let me give you a couple of metrics that kind of just like put a pin on that. One is Lee Summit. When I was working out here before for 8 years in a row, for basically 2 mayoral terms, if you will, or 2 councilmatic terms, they had 11 projects that were approved that were public-private partnerships. David Gale and I were a part of 2 of those. That went
Sure.
with David. Then you go to the next 8 years, when my first 8 years at the Port Authority, and this city did another 6 or 7. Fast forward to the last 8 years, this mayor and council have done 34 and counting. And by the time the mayor and this council get out of office in a few months, I think that number is going to be nearly 40.
Wow.
So that is a 4X, no matter how you look at it in capital, you know, or numbers of projects. It's 4 times more per year than they were doing before. And it's just an incredible amount of deal flow. The other thing would be what we talked about before, is just then how does that deal with population? When you change and you grow so quickly, there can be some really measurable things. And I will go back to 25 years ago. When I was working with the Lee Summit EDC as a member, they said, look, we're bleeding medical dollars and services. We're bleeding higher ed.
Mm.
dollars in services. We're bleeding retail. We were exporting dollars to the metro in all three. Today, we're importing all three, and we have one of the most resilient retail markets, as you know, as a broker. I mean, when you look at what happened post COVID, the elasticity of demand to refill empty boxes, I just didn't see it happen faster than anywhere than in Lee Summit. And at the same time, we're building more retail than anybody else in the metro.
Yep.
So becoming a net attractor for those three has been very symbiotic. Higher ed and medical feed retail. I mean, it's just a perfect complementary deal. And then you throw on top of that the focus on downtown Lee Summit. No one else in the metro has 16 contiguous blocks of not missing teeth in a historic downtown. I'm sorry to my friends in Kansas City, but you don't have that in River Market. You don't have that in downtown Liberty. You don't have that in downtown Independence. You don't have that in downtown Kansas City or the Crossroads. There is no other place in the metro where you have 16 contiguous blocks of no missing teeth in a historic downtown. It is like a Hallmark movie every day in downtown Lee Summit.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, it is a place to be seen, and it is attracting people that want to go hang out, and they want to have their businesses there. And it is a case study, right? It is an incredible case study. And if you haven't spent time in downtown Lee Summit, you absolutely should. I still remember 5 or 6 years ago, I think, when 3rd Street Social went in, and that was like the hottest spot around, right? Like, you got to go check this place out. And now just blossomed around. You got coffee bars, you got cocktail bars, you got all this different walkable retail. It's a really cool spot, man. It's kind of one of these areas that I kind of liken to this. I forget who wrote this book, but it was something around suburban, which is like this suburban urban areas, right? Yeah. Where and this is a hallmark of it, and it's really cool to see.
Well, listen, here's the other part of that people sometimes forget is it wouldn't move a market, but it helps a market. There are 3,000 people a month often that get on and off of Amtrak in downtown Lee Summit. And thanks to the state of Missouri, who has the Missouri River Runner, so that goes twice a day. Because if you go between St. Louis and Chicago or Kansas City and Chicago, that's one train a day.
Yep.
You can't build a market on one train a day, but Missouri has wisely invested, I believe, in the Missouri River Runner. So if you need to go between St. Louis, Jeff City, and Kansas City, you have 2 trains a day. You can actually make a business trip and get back on the same day. That's the kind of thing that helps a city like Independence and Kansas City and Lee Summit, who have stops, because you can quickly get places from here. So that's another little secret sauce that a lot of people in the metro don't understand. You can come out here at 12:30, shop, get back on the train and be at Union Station at 8:30 tonight after having a nice dinner.
Yeah.
And people do it. And it is, I can't wait for more people to discover that joy of what I call living in a real city, right? Like that you can do something like that, and you can do it for less than the cost of one-way Uber, by the way.
There you go. Yeah, I love the connectivity. That's a great point to be made. You know, we kind of mentioned here that the Economic Development Council attracts opportunity and the city makes it buildable, right? And then there's probably got to be a really strong kind of back and forth with your engagement with the city and understanding those different components here. But it has been remarkable just to see the growth over the last, since I've been here in Kansas City, just the last 10 or 12 years. It's been phenomenal to continue to see. So let's talk about that. Let's kind of see what accomplishments is the EDC kind of most proud of right now. I know you've only been there for 10 months, but you've been engaged with Lee Summit for quite some time. What are some of those major wins and milestones?
Well, look, I think the recognition from the development and just the placement of capital and the resiliency, like I said before, where markets get hit nationwide or regionally, and ours tend to pop back faster. And I think that has to do with not only what's what I call the certainty of outcomes in Lee Summit, and one I think the big wins are for me is we get recognized by the industry, by contractors, so the construction companies, the investment companies, the deal makers for the real estate industry tend to like to come here and see if it's a good fit for Lee Summit first instead of last. And I think that's because of the certainty of outcomes. I'll call it the certainty of process and then the certainty of the outcome. The certainty of process is what the city staff has done. It's always been good in Lee Summit, but it's never been better than right now. The professionalism and the processes that the city manager and the assistant city manager and the director of development services, those three people and everyone who reports in and out of all the other departments through them, this is a place where you know what the process is going to be, and you know that you're going to have problem solvers instead of problem creators on the city staff to help you along the way. Then you fast forward that to the point where the plan commission and or the city council has to vote, and the strong planning and implementation history of this city, you really have very few blips in the history books where Lee Summit said by policy or plan, hey, we want this kind of development under this incentive policy, and then developers bring it and then are handed their head. When you do that, you're closed for business. Lee Summit just doesn't do that. And that's so important because there is fast growth here. There is community backlash, and that's rational backlash, right? But when you have a strong plan and you have a strong policy, and you as an elected or a volunteer on the plan commission or elected on the city council can say, but our plan says this is what we want. So don't tell me to vote no on this. Tell me to change the plan, and we'll talk about changing the plan.
Right.
And I think that is a very healthy city because people are reacting to things, especially in a social media world, that is completely rational to react to. However, if you do the right education, like this mayor and council and plan commission and staff tend to have a history of doing, where you say, okay, no, we'll listen to you, but we're not going to stop it. We're going to slow it down, let you have your say, but we're not going to slow it down enough to make people not want to invest here. Mm-hmm. That's a careful balance because you have to respect the process. And part of the process is listening to the naysayers. And I think they're doing an amazing job. And it is one of the reasons why I would leave a job and a team that I loved to come back to work in Lee Summit, because it's almost unparalleled.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to me, that is the win. The win is the process and the outcome.
Yeah.
And certainty of it, right? You want to invest where there's certainty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been some recent developments announced over the last 3 to 4 months that takes some serious certainty from some national retailers. Any of those that you'd like to highlight here today?
Yeah, well, I think everyone likes to talk about the Costco deal. I mean, because it is such you don't have very many Costcos in a single metropolitan area, right? So it really matters that folks in Mid and South Lee Summit no longer have to drive to North Lee Summit across the border into Independence. Because that store sits within a few hundred feet of the city limit, the north end of Lee Summit now. So it's not like Lee Summit hasn't been served by Costco, but to have the southern end of our city where the high and the west side connected and have that growth served. And we all know that a retailer like Costco attracts a lot of other retail trips.
Yes.
People drive a long way to go to Sam's or Costco. So this is good for the Drake Development's Oldham Village. It's good for everybody else around them because they will attract. But if you don't mind, I'd love to talk about another wet win in this same vein, which is the development's activity centers for development in the strategic plan of the city, because I think it's one of the reasons, again, that I wanted to thanks for this slide, because I know it sounds nerdy and wonky, but I used to make my living for a short period of my career writing comprehensive plans for cities and for economic development agencies. And when I read the Ignite plan that Lee Summit delivered a little more than 3 years ago, it made me want to take the job more
Yeah.
because it's just so smart and rational. You have this very low density, low population city that is growing into this other thing. And what they recognized in their planning process was they couldn't afford the city that they were building because it was too low density uniformly across the whole city. So someday you have to replace the 40 to 80-year-old sewer line and water line and curbs and gutters and
Mhm.
all those things that eventually need to be replaced. And they didn't have a tax base per lineal foot of any of that stuff to ever dream that they could afford to replace it someday. So this plan said, okay, we'll deliver five scenarios for density. And one of them was status quo. And then it went up in density, and they used metrics and comparisons to other metropolitan and national benchmark cities. And they picked the fourth. But what they picked was not just an overall density, Logan. They said, we're going to have 5 areas in our city that are high density activity centers that retailers will want to invest in even more because there's density around them, that maybe flex transit would work better, or driverless cars in the future would work better in those places. All those things, those future looking things, and those things that just frankly, metropolitan Kansas City hasn't done very well at over
Mhm.
time, looking at smart growth policies that are better off. So what they said is 85% of our land mass will still be low density. The reason why the supermajority of people moved out here in the first place, bucolic, low density, relatively to others, higher incomes, but we'll have these dense nodes to service that the medical community want to invest in more, that retailers want to invest in more, that employers want to be next to, because employers don't like to be next to low density areas either.
Right.
Of them, right? So it's attractive to everyone, and it gives the best of both. But more importantly, over time, it's fiscally responsible policy, not just physically responsible policy for real estate developers. So I love it about it. It's, to the words you have on here, infrastructure and livability balance. It is those things. And again, I work for this place, man. I mean, my job is literally to say these things, but I mean it when I said I've never seen a more logically and rationally written suburban strategic plan. I just have never seen one, and it just attracted to me to this job.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely showing and paying off. And I will say that there's a massive disconnect when people think about how large from a square mile standpoint that actually Kansas City is.
Yeah,
And I think I saw some stat. Beck Johnson put out some really good stuff on LinkedIn. He's been real invested in understanding economic growth and things like that. So I really shout out to Beck. Keep it up, man. I love reading your work. And one of the things that he said was, I think in like 1950, we had like 300,000, 350,000 people in KCMO. You
yeah,
fast track to 2025 or 24, we have 550,000 people that lived in Kansas City, Missouri, right? And
yeah,
so, I mean, but we still service like 450 or 500 square miles
yeah.
of roads, of infrastructure, of all of that. So if you're listening in and don't really are making that connection, is what Joe was mentioning, is that tax base still has to service all of that. So there's a reason that our roads are the way that they are, and we
Yeah.
have potholes, and it's very difficult. Not only that, it's very difficult to police that many square miles, right? And so
Oh, that's it.
yes, in newer cities,
Soft
like
infrastructure needs density even more than capital expenditure for the hard infrastructure, the roads, the sewers, right?
absolutely. And so it's just a really unique component of seeing a city like Lee Summit understand that and trying to actually put a vision and a plan together to actually do it in a feasible way. And so it's good to see. And I think that a lot of cities around, I mean, I think that in the Kansas City metropolitan statistical area, there's 9 counties, I think, on the Missouri side and 5 counties on the Kansas side, major ones, right? And I mean, it's a huge area. Somebody told me the other day that it's the same size as Manhattan, but with 550,000 people in the one city. 2.5 million in the the MSA, obviously, but I don't know how many people live in Manhattan. It's a whole lot more than that. I will tell you that, right? So
Yes.
just kind of mind-boggling.
It is. Logan, so least to bring that down to the Lee Summit level, Lee Summit has been over 60 square miles almost since the time it was an incorporated city. When it was 41,000 people, it wasn't much smaller than it is today in footprint. It's always been a big footprint city. At a time when Kansas City was 20 square miles, Lee Summit was still 60 square miles. So today you got a 65 square mile city in Lee Summit. And what's extraordinary right now is you have 10% of the land mass getting ready to come through infrastructure. We're applying the infrastructure to the 1,065 of the North Property Reserve land, the LDS land. And then you've got a plan coming up for the 33,000 plus acres in South Lee Summit. These are extraordinary areas because they're surrounded by development, almost complete development on 3 sides of both pieces of ground. And you rarely get a piece of ground that big. But going back to like what's best about Lee Summit, the financial resiliency of the city, because they have been looking at these factors as they grew really fast. They're not trying to figure out how to pay for the next development. They actually said, for that 1,065 acres that's coming out this year for infrastructure going in the ground, that's $103 million worth of needed infrastructure. And they have $54 million canned up in the bank on the public side.
Wow.
And financial resiliency of Lee Summit is another good reason why a guy who had a job he loved with a team he loved would come out to work here, because rarely are we working in a city that doesn't have those kinds of financial constraints that makes it hard on private development to make that first investment. And, I'll give you one more example to that. You have Intrinsic Development moving to Lee Summit, their headquarters from Columbia, Missouri. And their first development is what used to be part of Unity Village that was friendly de-annexed and annexed into Lee Summit. And on that first piece of property, they've got plus or minus $900 million worth of development planned and approved. The first year in, they're putting $238 million worth of CapEx into vertical construction right now. And the city went along with a $12 million road that they could just cash flow. And like everywhere else in the world, we would be putting 100% of that burden somehow into the developer's capital expenditure plan, right? And then give it to us. To be able to sit down with the city staff and say, what's the rational cost sharing of this? How does the city leverage cash flows we have into creating this in a way that makes sense for current residents as well as future residents? Having that luxury makes it a lot easier to vote yes when you're a city council member, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think we're sort of seeing some of that happen over in the Lenexa corridor as well, right? I mean, everybody was wondering, where are these roads going to, right? Well, now drive around Lenexa City Center, right? I mean, they built those roads a long time ago to nowhere. And
okay, I have to bring this up because I am a big fan of Lenexa City Center. I mean, I just really am. I just think they've done it.
What a cool area. Yeah.
But I will tell you, I was able to work with Juan Uribe and other professionals when I was at HNTB in the 1990s and had the pleasure of working on the layout of Prairie Star Parkway and the K7 corridor, all those ago, and then to see what they have done with it since, what the land planning that underlaid the alignment of those roads that we helped lay out with great city staff at Lenexa decades ago was nothing compared to what they've implemented today. So I am such a fan of what Lenexa has done with that opportunity. And then again, just when I come out here to Lee Summit and I look at that with intrinsic developments, with PRI, with what Drake Development's doing, that's just a cut above of what everybody else in the metro seems to be doing with similar opportunities. It gets real exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Now, you mentioned a decent amount of land coming available for development and the infrastructure around that. What types of development is Lee Summit trying to attract for that land, right? Like, what is it that you believe that could really, take, Lee Summit to the next level with this huge opportunity of land mass that's coming available?
Well, right now, let's just piece by piece of that 1,065. You've got hundreds of acres, but north of 500 acres for industrial development in that. And when you look at that opportunity, there's only 2 or 3 other places in the whole metro, and really only one other one that I consider to be on an interstate in an area like that, with job access, with reliable infrastructure. The others just pale in location or in workforce, or some other fashion. So that's extraordinary, and I wouldn't want to not mention that. I think, when the world brings you opportunities for a European auto manufacturer's first plant or something like that, there aren't very many places in the state of Missouri, and there's probably only one other location that I think is equal to it in the metropolitan area. So that's a huge opportunity. A second is that piece of land is about 2/3 in Blue Springs School District and Blue Springs South High School draw area, and the rest is in Lee Summit School District. So you've got excellent schools, very attainable communities. One of the things I think people don't know about Lee Summit, and for that matter, Olathe, these 2 high-growing cities, is that these are very purple and, if you will, rainbow cities. I mean, these are places where neither party is in control, and I think that is good for development, because that means everybody, and when you have a racially diverse, income diverse, and politically diverse population, everybody sees themselves coming and going down the street. No one feels precluded. But more importantly, when you're investing in real estate and in public libraries and schools, that means everybody is your customer, right? I mean, the whole metropolitan area is your customer, because no one feels excluded. No one feels like they're absolutely in control. Everybody feels like they have a voice in the community, and you're welcome. And so I think that is huge part of a big piece of ground like this coming available, is everybody is your market.
Most definitely. That's really well said. Very excited to continue to watch that. Now, I think that a lot of you have mentioned the fiscal responsibility of Lee Summit. As a developer, being a developer myself, you've been doing developments in your career as well. It's really difficult to make them work without incentive tools, right? And so let's talk about some of those incentive tools that Lee Summit uses to drive these quality developments. I mean, you just mentioned a $12 million road, which is a big expense for a development, right? That's one, obviously, being able to do that. But what are some other tools out there that developers and folks should be thinking about?
Yeah, no, I think you've got a great list here. And one of the things that Lee Summit has done a good job over time is making sure the time it takes to get these things approved and the discussion it takes to make sure everybody understands what the public return on investment are. These are not giveaways, these are investments. And that is a very hard narrative to sell in a way that's authentic and real and transparent. And so process is one thing, but then what are the right tools? I again, would come out to Lee Summit at a point in time where they're using all of the tools, not just relying on the same ones because they're easy or because they're expedient. I think there is a good, healthy discussion. Like when you're looking at a list like this, you have CIDs and tax increment finance, which is often a bigger investment, right? You're taking almost everything and putting it able to solve big problems that you have, versus the rest of them where the local taxing jurisdictions are getting some increment from day one. And what I really appreciate on the use of incentives is widely the local jurisdictions, like the school districts especially, and the library districts, are in favor of these projects, as more often than they're against them. And so I think that that's helpful also. And so what you're demonstrating here is real property tax exemption and abatement, personal property tax and sales tax, and then of course STECM, if you will, sales tax exemption on construction materials. So those are, when you put them all in a stack, and you're able to say what on this project is best, and make sure that it's financially, and that you're not robbing the future in such a way that the next person's going to find it almost impossible to do a deal. And without naming names, there are communities right now where it's really hard to do a deal because they've leveraged everything in the future on something. And I'm going to stop there because it starts to sound like I'm talking about a hot topic this week.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Well, we just covered, this is a shameless plug for the podcast here, but we just covered Lee Summit's planning and zoning meeting last week. Right. And so just trying to go in and really give a summary of these planning and zoning meetings, because I find so much value in understanding what's being approved, what's not being approved. Right. And it's really interesting to me. I'm kind of a geek in that regard. And if anybody's interested, obviously you can go to the podcast and check that out, but I highly recommend either attending some of these meetings, but also you can, now with social media and with, video, everything is either recorded, it's live, or there's a summary that you can go read. And with artificial intelligence, guess what? You can summarize that stuff very quickly, right? But I am curious, how, in your opinion, how much of the city's growth actually starts in these rooms, in these meetings? Because I find it to be very important to understand it on keeping your finger on the pulse. And I can't figure out why more people don't really tap into these things.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an indicator of what my answer to that is that existing businesses growing is on the employment side just way more important than attracting the new businesses that will then come here and likely grow too, especially for a city the size of Lee Summit and the location we are in the metropolitan area. So it's really important when someone like Mid-States was in front of the city council just yesterday. And, all the right concerns are brought up in the hearings, and you talk about, but you have a company that's been here for about a decade. They want to double, just about double their employment base. They want to increase their footprint by 50%. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of really good discussion that goes into whether or not that's a good investment for the city. And to your point, I watched it at home. It's easy, folks. You can just go out or you can watch the summaries that people like yourself provide as hey, this is a review of what happened. There's a lot of content getting generated out of this, but it is what I also see is there is a very, very vocal minority that does show up.
Yes, they do.
That has a countervailing view of, is this good for our city? And that's the noise you started with, right? I mean, there's a lot of noise. And it's, by the way, they're rational opinions. People have these opinions because they're based on their own life experience in one way or the other. So it's not like I'm saying that they're wrong. It's just that there's far more people that I think understand the value of jobs, the value of not staying still, and seeing, the grassy field behind them when they bought their piece of property become other people's homes and other people's shopping districts and employment places. So that's what I see going on here.
Yeah.
In the
Well,
process.
I want to share one story because I recently joined the board for our local homeowners association. I don't know. I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment. And I'm at the annual meeting, right? And we literally covered this whole topic of, hey, we are not going to cancel our waste management contract. Everybody loves waste management. Well, 30 minutes after that conversation, they asked for any questions. And this nice old lady raises her hand and she said, I just can't understand why we would ever leave, waste management. It is fantastic. And I kid you not, Joe, for 7 minutes, we tried to explain to her, we are not doing that. It is staying. So I do think there is a lot of just miscommunication as well that happens. And these meetings do really kind of serve as a way to really clear those things up as well, right? And so it just kind of it's just one of those components that I just lived through here recently. So I just wanted to share that story.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move into my favorite round. So Joe, you've been a pleasure to spend some time with here today, but I always love to ask the same type of questions. Okay, so what is your favorite book or podcast, maybe of all time, or something that you're reading right now?
Yeah, so he's a friend, and Kevin Klinkenberg has a series called This Messy City, and he just has a good. I just love listening to Kevin's podcast because he's always been a thought leader in my world on things that he challenges me on, and so that's one. I also I think the world could use a lot more challenging our conventional wisdom. And I don't agree with everything that Chuck Marohn and the Strong Towns group puts out there, but I challenge myself by reading books by people like Chuck, right? And
absolutely,
I agree with a lot of it. And the reason I'm such a fan of it, and I'm telling people in Lee Summit to go look at it and read it, is he does expose some of the fallacies that federal and state and local policy has been built on. And I don't want to make any of my friends mad, so I'm not going to say particularly what elements I'm talking about, but I think if you read the book and you decide, I spent my whole career thinking that is how you measure this, and I'm part of the problem by using that because I'm just digging the hole deeper for the next generation. I love those kinds of books, and that's why I listen to people like Kevin's podcast and read books like Chuck Marohn's Strong Town series.
Yeah, well, great recommendations. I'm a follower of both of those myself, so I appreciate you mentioning those. What's a new upcoming project or development that gets you most excited about in 2026? Maybe we've already covered it, but let's just quick take highlight that.
Yeah, I'm going to say it is Intrinsic Development's Discovery Park, and it's because it's an example of implementing this great plan vision for the city that my predecessors were already doing before I came back here. And because when I look at 2 hotels that are going to open before the World Cup and be full from day one and successful from day one, 265 multifamily units over about 70,000 square feet of retail and office that they, by the way, already have 10 signed contracts for tenants of. When you look at that, there's very little friction in the pipe to come in and if you're the developer, to go into phase 2 because you have cash flow on phase 1. Yes. So I get really excited with a project like that, not because I think it's the only project that's moving the needle in Lee Summit, because it's just emblematic, because it's big and it's working like that. And yes, it has great deep pocket, benevolent kind of developers that can do things that other people can't do. That's wonderful. But anyone based on the success of what they seemingly are going to have in the first phase, is going to be something I can sell into and say, if you develop here and you do, again, and I could say the same thing about Drake development. Matt's not finished with the streets of West Pryor. As he's building the last pieces of that, he's developing competition for it down the street.
Yes.
When you have that kind of thing going on your city, and then you're also working with just as many infill pieces that don't individually move the needle like those two do, right? Those are all exciting. I answered your question for one with two or three, but those are examples of what it makes this an easy place to sell.
Absolutely. If you had to describe Lee Summit in one word, the future, what would it be?
Certain. Again, going back, it's a certain place to invest. It's a certain place to develop. It's a certain place to choose to put your business, a certain place to buy your first home or your third home, because your return on making that decision, whether it's an individual or a collective or on behalf of an employer, you have certainty of what's going to happen next. And so certain is the word I would use.
I love that. And what's one trend that you're seeing coming that maybe most people aren't talking about yet?
I really do believe that in the world of everything, I don't care if you're talking about office space, retail space, the size of an operating suite in a hospital or someone's personal home, I think big is better is finally dead in this country. And what I'm seeing more and more, and I'll just use residential as an example, I'm finally seeing young people investing in homes where the first thing they talk about is the quality of that space that they're getting instead of the square footage of that space that they're buying. And I think that is not just in residential, it's in everything. Smaller apartments that rent for more per square feet is what people want, not the big apartment that had huge square footage that isn't very delightful or nice per square foot. And I think people are really, big is better is dead. And that's a trend that I'm not sure everybody sees. And there's a lot of people my age and a little bit younger and a lot older that are still, well, why would you ever pay $800,000 for a 2,000 square foot house?
Right.
They can't imagine ever making that investment. And that's just an example. But the same way in office space, we see people at a time where office is coming back after COVID, and we're seeing people pay tons more per square foot for way less square footage, right?
Yes.
And putting the same number of people there for many reasons. But I just see that as a trend where it's a right-hand turn toward quality in almost every asset class.
Yeah, it's really well said. I mean, thoughtful spaces are definitely standing out, right? And I couldn't agree more. Joe, if people want to learn more about the LSEDC, do they just go over to the website? What is the website?
Yeah, the website is Lee's Summit, no apostrophes, no dashes, just one word, Lee's Summit. 2 S's, 2 M's, 1 T, leessummit.org. Easy. That's same website for the last 35 years. That's where to find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us here, Joe. I know the audience has found this to be extremely valuable, and I sure did, and I learned a lot. So thank you. I'm excited to continue to watch the growth of Lee Summit. I'll be involved in some capacity for sure, and we appreciate you sharing your insights today.
Logan, thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to learn more about Midwest Commercial Real Estate Advisors, just head over to mwcreadvisors.com. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Kansas City Commercial Real Estate Market Pulse. We'll be back here again live tomorrow with another great guest. See you guys soon.
Thanks, Logan.